What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So yesterday, the UFC made one of the most depressing announcements I've ever heard in my time watching this sport. And I've been watching since 2005. And this is one of the worst things I can remember. And that news, of course, was Diego Lopez getting a rematch shot against Alexander Volkanovski. Now, everyone's outraged about this. Everyone knows it's complete BS. But no one realizes how terrible it is. And I'm going to unpack it because I got some strong opinions about this. And if you've been watching my channel a long time, you might have a sense of where I'm going with it, but I'm going to unpack it here because there's a lot to discuss. By denying Volk his fight with Evloev, and bear in mind, I'm mad on Volk's behalf. Like, I get that Evloev is the top contender and he deserves the fight. He's being robbed too. And the UFC has gotten in this terrible habit now of denying top contenders their rightful title shots just to make these like cheap cash grabs and try to corner certain markets or whatever. But like, I don't even care that much for Evloev. I care for Volk because I love Volk. And the fight with Evloev is very important. You know, if Evloev waits a minute and gets a title shot against whoever the hell, I don't really care. I care about Volk and his goatness. Because if he can beat Evloev, there is an argument that he is the GOAT, that he is the greatest fighter of all time. Now, that might sound a little hyperbolic to some of you. You might say, well, how could that one win do that? You know, Volk's great, but he's not that great, and that win wouldn't be that great either. But let me explain. Volkanovski is one of the greatest fighters of all time. You know, your rankings may vary. You could have him as high as 2 or 3. You know, I think it'd be a little ridiculous to have him lower than 5. You know, he's not number 1, but he's up there, okay? He's done great things, okay? He never lost in his division in his prime. That's one crucial thing. He beat 3 generations of people in his division because he beat the old guard in Mendes and Aldo. And the Aldo one's very good. Like, Aldo was probably past his prime a little bit. He was arguably at like the very, very tail end of his prime, given his age. But, you know, I've talked a lot about people's primes over the years. Like, Aldo was fighting long enough and at a high enough level that probably wasn't his prime anymore. But it was, you know, it was on the edge. You know, it's similar to Oliveira when he fought Islam, where it's like if you just look at his age, you'd say, well, yeah, that guy's still in his prime. But if you kind of look at his body of work, you have a reason to question it. But he was either at the tail end of his prime or at the very beginning of his decline. But in any case, very good win for Volk. And again, that's beating the old guard. He beats people from his era. You know, he beats Max, he beats Ortega, he beats Yair, and he beats now, in his return, a contender from the new generation. He beats Lopez. That 3 generations of success is very, very rare. You only see it to varying degrees from guys like John Jones, from Mighty Mouse, from GSP. Like, that's the kind of shit Volk has done. And of course, much of Volk's greatness is based on the fact that he beat Max Holloway, himself, arguably, you know, well, not even arguably, the second best featherweight of all time. I mean, it is arguable. You know, second or third best featherweight of all time. And one of the greatest fighters of all time. You know, Max is arguably top 10 all time, and at worst top 15. And Volk beat him 3 times. And that's huge. That's like a better, if you look at other fighters' resumes, very rarely do they have another GOAT on their list. And very rarely do they have that GOAT 3 times on their list. You know, the nearest you can get is like, you know, Jose Aldo beating Frankie Edgar twice, or like John Jones beating Daniel Cormier kind of twice, but really once. And stuff like that. But like, you know, to beat Max Holloway 3 times in his prime is insane. And that this all collectively, and of course just his obvious skill and fighting spirit and everything, all this collectively is what makes Volk one of the best fighters ever. Now, he had a unique opportunity with Evloev as a challenger, because one thing that I factor in when I consider your resume is not just the quality of your wins, but the styles you had to defeat and how you defeated them. So, like Max Holloway, for example, is a great fighter, but he has not fought a lot of grapplers. You know, he simply hasn't. Go through his resume. You know, he fought Ortega, who's a jiu-jitsu guy, and that's all well and good. They barely grappled at all in that fight. so that is a knock against Max. Now, Volkanovski has, of course, beaten very, very elite strikers like Jose and like Max, and tricky, weird strikers like Yair. But he and he did so striking. He ground and pounded Yair, but he outstruck Max on the feet and he outstruck Aldo. He fought Ortega, the same guy Max fought, but they actually went to the ground. Like Volk had to fight out of very, very, very deep submission attempts. And not only did he successfully do that, like showing his prowess on the ground and his prowess in his submission defense, but then he didn't just immediately go back to his feet. He stayed on the ground and beat the fuck out of Ortega and like won back that fight and like won back those rounds and just like showed like I am the better man. And it's reminiscent of like what Fedor Emelianenko did. Like part of why Fedor is so great is because he would fight elite guys in their phase of the fight. Like he fought Nogueira and he just went to the ground with him the whole time. He just sat in his guard and just like slipped out his submission attempts the whole fight and pummeled the shit out of him. Like the safer bet would be like, oh, just stay on the feet. Just stay on the feet. When he fought Crow Cop, he took him down a few times, but a huge amount of that fight was on the feet. And Fedor, he game planned for the high kicks and he pressured him and got in his face and threw hands with him. And like the fact that he not only beat specialists, but that he beat them in phases of their fight, to his advantage. He was on top with Nogueira. He was pressuring Crow Cop, but nevertheless, he was on the ground with Nogueira. He was on the feet with Crow Cop. It's the same with Volk. And, and Ortega, it's easy to dismiss Ortega, but as a threatening jiu-jitsu guy, it doesn't get any better than Ortega. Like, there's better jiu-jitsu guys, like there's world champions, of course, and Ortega is not that, but even elite guys, like even your Gilbert Burnses and, people like that, they don't have the sort of like threatening submissions that Ortega does. Ortega is uniquely gifted as a guy where as soon as you're on the ground with him, you're in immediate danger because he is such a potent submissions like snatcher upper that it's genuinely threatening. Like it's not just like, you can't just like hang out with him for protracted time and be safe, Whereas with most guys, like your Jacare Souzas and whatnot, like they're good grapplers, they're good submission artists, they're elite jiu-jitsu guys, but they don't have that just like that equivalent of like a one-punch knockout in the submission area. And Ortega has that. And Volk, again, not only hung out on the ground with him and like ground and pounded him, but he was in deep submissions like that. Like I remember before the Volkanovski Islam fight, like people were saying, "Oh, if Islam gets Volk in a mounted guillotine like Ortega does, that'll be it." I'm like, Islam does not have it. Islam is a better overall grappler than Ortega, but he does not have the submission skills that Ortega does. A, B, I'm like, that's just not going to happen. like that circumstance cannot be replicated because what happened was Volk threw a low kick. If I remember right, Volk threw a low kick. Ortega kind of like threw a right hand that like kind of, I don't even know if it connected with the face. It might have connected with the chest, but it just kind of like pushed Volk over. It knocked him over because he was on one foot. And in less than a second, Ortega just like teleported into the deepest mounted guillotine you've ever seen. And when I saw that live, I was like, fuck, this is it. Volk's going to lose. And then, he's just frantically kipping his legs and everything, and he gets out, and, it's miraculous. And so when people are saying, like, oh, what if Islam gets in that same situation? I'm like, that situation will never be replicated by anyone. Not that Islam had no ability to submit Volk, not that there was no submission threat, but it wouldn't come that way. It would come more like it did against Oliveira or how Saryukians did against Hooker this weekend, where it's like, oh, he gets him down, beats him up, like arm triangles him or something. It's not going to be as soon as you like slipped, I just teleported into a guillotine. It's not going to be that. And so again, like for Volk to do that, for Volk to weather that storm and win the way he did, means a lot. It means more than Max's win over Ortega. And it means more than like Islam Makhachev, for example. Like he's beaten good jiu-jitsu guys like Moises and Moicano and whatnot, but like Davi Ramos, is like an Abu Dhabi champion, I believe. And I know MMA Che has like just been like, oh my God, he beat this Abu Dhabi guy. And Khabib never fought an Abu Dhabi guy. And look at how great that is for Islam. It's like Islam didn't go to the ground with him the whole fight. Ramos couldn't get him down. They were on the feet the whole time. He ends up dropping Ramos with a knee at like the, midway through the third round or something like that. And he spends some time on top, lands a little bit of ground and pound, and that's it. The fight's over. Like that. Like it's not like it was a grappling fest and Islam was like, outmaneuvering him and submitted him or something like that. It's not like when Mighty Mouse fought Wilson Hayes, who was a world champion in jiu-jitsu at brown belt, and mauled him on the ground and submitted him. Like that. Those are not the same thing. I don't give a shit if they're both world champion jiu-jitsu guys. One of those is a better win and shows more about your skill and your ability to tangle with your opponent in their preferred area, and one fucking doesn't. So, again, with Volk, for him to do what he did with Ortega, and for him to have the striking prowess that he does and have outstruck and out-finessed guys like Jose and like Max, what's left? The wrestler. And what better opportunity than a young, undefeated, very big, very physical, guy in Evloev, who is on this great win streak, who just represents, he's near the peak as far as this current wave of Dagestani and Caucasus region wrestlers. Like, he represents that style. Not only would it be a chance for Volk to get sort of a moral victory, a sort of moral revenge for his losses against Islam, but more importantly, it would be a chance for him to show that he can also deal with the wrestler. Because realistically, like, he would have to wrestle in that fight. Realistically, Volk is not the kind of knockout artist. He's not going to take Evloev out in the first round. And Evloev realistically is going to get to him, and they're going to have to grapple. Volk is going to have to scramble. He's going to have to get up. He's going to have to fight the hands. He's going to have to leverage his conditioning, etc., in order to win, in order to either get a late stoppage or a decision. And I think that's entirely doable. I think Volk could very much win that fight. I like his chances. I would pick him to win. It'd be a tough outing, but I'd pick him to win. Because Evloev, while a great wrestler, he's not that much of a finishing threat. And Volk, he's just so good defensively. His anti-wrestling is so good, and his pace is so good, and his footwork and his striking and everything are so good. I think he would win. And he would have to wrestle to win. And so it'd be similar to the Ortega thing. It'd be similar to the Holloway and Aldo thing, where he'd have to be in the space. He'd have to be in that domain that his opponent prefers, and he'd have to show that he knows how to handle that in order to get the win. And if he could do that, if he could outstrike Aldo, outstrike Max, survive the way he did against Ortega and then beat him up on the ground, and then if he could, anti-wrestle his way into beating the shit out of Evloev, that's such a comprehensive, like, elite demonstration of skill in the different phases and against different kinds of fighters who are specialists in those phases. That's never happened before, okay? Look at all the GOATs. Like, the nearest is Mighty Mouse, but none of them have done quite that to that degree. And with that, again, I think that you could argue that's like enough to make Volk the GOAT. For him to come back later in his career and get the belt against Diego, kind of take out someone from that next generation, and then to beat Evloev, an undefeated guy in that win streak with that style, that's GOAT shit. And sure, like that, if Islam defends against Gary, then he'll have his argument. And if Pereira can get his triple belt, then he'll have his argument. And, if Merab goes up and gets a featherweight belt, he'll have his argument, whatever. But Volk will have a seat at the table. He will be, and GSP's around and all that stuff. But Volk will have an argument for being the number one guy. And the UFC is robbing him of that because they want the exciting Mexican fighter to be the champion. And that's it. And what's additionally ridiculous about that is Diego barely deserved the shot the first time. Like, he was already robbing Evloev of the shot when he got that opportunity then, and it's twice as bad now. And we just have seen that he's not a better fighter than Volk. Volk schooled him, except for getting dropped in whatever it was, the second round. And what that means is Diego's either just going to get schooled again, which, like, why are we watching that? Why is that doing anything for Volk's resume, for his legacy? And if Diego wins, it's just because he caught him. It's just because Volk is either because he got lucky, he's got a puncher's chance, and the 25 minutes is a lot to work, and he's a durable guy, and Volk's not going to finish him, and this time he caught him and put him away, Or, slash, like Volk is getting older. He's already past his prime. And yeah, with that means he's a little slower. His reflexes aren't there. Maybe he's a little chinnier. Like all these things come into play. And it's like, oh, great. Now Volk's old enough that anything you clip him with, if you're Diego, is going to hurt him. And, oh, you got him. Good for you. There's no way for Diego to win and prove he's the better man. We're all going to look at it and be like, we saw the first fight, buddy. Like, we know he was better than you. So even if Diego wins, no one's going to respect him as a champion. So it's like, this whole thing is just a fucking joke. And it's heartbreaking because everything was fucking lined up for Volk to get this fight against this perfect challenger who he had a very real shot at beating and that could have done so much for his legacy. And now we're not getting it. And who knows? Maybe it'll still happen. Maybe Volk will win in February or, whenever that card is. And maybe he'll have a quick turnaround and maybe it'll be against Evloev and maybe he'll win. God willing. But, Volk's getting up there in age. He might just retire with this win. This could be fucking it, guy. And it's this fucking bullshit corporate decision by the UFC to, give it to Diego. Again, I said at the forefront, everyone's mad about it. Everyone knows it's bullshit, but they don't realize how bullshit it is. And it's one of the most just catastrophic, dropping of the ball that I've ever seen in my entire time as a fan. So I wanted to rant about that a little bit. And that's all I got.